If you want to talk about climate change, you got to meet people where they live.
Dr. Robert Young is one of the nation's leading experts in sea level rise, climate change, and coastal geology. For a guy who grew up in a Virginia coastal town, it's a lifelong passion.
This isn't necessarily just a job. It's trying to find a way to preserve the natural ecosystems and the economy of the places that I love and that I like to go to with my family.
A professor and author based in North Carolina, Young is director of the Program for the Study of Developed Shorelines. He traveled to Pensacola to give a CivicCon presentation on U.S. coastal management in a time of rising sea level. Young pointed out the folly in many of the decisions currently being made.
At the same time that we're spending billions of dollars trying to protect infrastructure that is in flood vulnerable areas, we continue to put more infrastructure in flood vulnerable areas. All we ask at the Program for the Study of Developed Shorelines is that you bring all of the information to the table in a realistic way.
Making wise investments was a key message that he said. The whole emphasis on do no harm, but if you also relate that to how do you invest your funds in a community and how do you pay for things. So it was very clear, a very clear part of the message.
We need to start thinking about things now and not just reacting to after the storms and having the federal government pay for everything.
Young doesn't want to abandon the coast. He just advocates for smarter decisions that include local communities financing their own resilience. He delivered many insights on the practical effects of climate change and sea level rise. For Pensacola, the threat from hurricanes is obvious, but the rising water tables that saturate the ground and greatly increase flooding from rain events needs to be addressed as well.
I would argue that this may be the primary issue you're going to be dealing with here in the municipality of Pensacola. Stormwater.
Most people, when they think about the sea level rise, they think just about what's going on right at the ocean front. But to understand that the water has nowhere to go, and that's part of why after our storms, inland, and it's not just up the rivers, but even places inland, the water's percolating back up.
Young followed up his main CivicCon presentation with a session for community leaders on this issue. It got a little more granular on what Pensacola can do.
It's really nice to go in there with a map that says, here's where the water was. You can't argue with that.
Young gave the example of a county in South Carolina that was able to take decisive steps after his team did a sensitivity analysis to help explain the vulnerabilities.
The big takeaway for me is obviously solutions are local, which I thought that was great to kind of reiterate that. I'm an environmental scientist, so I'm pretty closely in tune with a lot of things that are happening. Really appreciate Student Community Institute for leading the charge with putting these thought leaders together in rooms and coming up with solutions.
The answers to anything that's difficult here in Pensacola, the answers are here in Pensacola. I think that you're engaged in this community discussion about how do we do this. There are people who feel helpless. There are people who feel that everything's going okay. But discussions like the ones we're having right now certainly go a long way towards bridging that gap.
CivicCon is a partnership between the Pensacola News Journal and the Studer Community Institute. To learn more, visit studeri.org/CivicCon.